Good to see everyone. Pictures, thank you. Janay, welcome. And thank you so much. I know we're going to go ahead and get started because we're about 5 minutes after 2. But I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on race and ethnicity data. Welcome to you all who are new to our webinar series, and welcome back if you attended our first webinar that we had with Dr. Joyce Ballsbury, who did a great presentation on race and ethnicity, and we had a discussion afterwards. We'll have that recording available if you're interested in that, and we'll also be recording today. But I am Tamiko McGee-Rogers. I lead our Inclusive Research Initiative at GAP. We have a team of community connectors that are dedicated to helping our sites improve representation in clinical trials that are AD and PD specific. And we're just excited to have you all today and to learn more from our sites on what they're doing and just the importance of collecting race and ethnicity in clinical trials. Again, happy to see you all, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Janay Austin Todd. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGee-Rogers, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all again for joining us today. We are so thrilled to be joined by an esteemed panel of folks that represent the vast array of our clinical research arena, if you will. And so I will just start with brief introductions and bios. And as our webinar progresses today, you'll get to know more about their expansive experience in this space. So Dr. Cherian Verghese, we will be joined by very shortly here, but Dr. Verghese is our principal investigator on the call. He has dedicated his career to developing new medications to treat neuropsychiatric disorders. After earning his medical degree in Bombay, India, he completed training in psychiatry and neurology and received board certifications in India, the UK, and the US. In 2003, he founded Keystone Clinical Studies, now known as Flourish, Philadelphia. Ellen Frinks holds a BS in bioengineering and an MS in health administration. She has 19 years of professional experience in research. In her current role as the Assistant Director of Axiom Brain Health in Tampa, Florida, she leads a team in clinical trials focused on Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. Nikole Bowe is a clinical research coordinator at Syrentis Clinical Research in Santa Ana, California. She has a BA in cognitive psychology and 3 years of experience working in clinical research, including clinical trials for Alzheimer's dementia. As a CRC, Nikole is responsible for coordinating with the study participants and the investigator, and she also has extensive experience administering cognitive and clinical tests. Reuben Gatonga holds a master's degree in biotechnology from Azusa Pacific University and a Master of Theology from International Theological Seminary. With over a year of experience at Syrentis Clinical Research, Reuben plays a pivotal role in the recruitment department, focusing on engaging underrepresented populations in clinical trials. Justin Ford has 10 plus years industry experience in private, academic, and hospital-based settings. He has worked in many modalities of research, and he serves on our Inclusive Research Initiative team as a manager of diversity and community outreach, also known as a community connector, which I am also. Very humbled to be your facilitator in this conversation that we're going to have today. As I said, am a community connector. I have over a decade of experience in nonprofits, specifically focusing on older adults and seniors, most recently coming from AARP. And I hold a bachelor's of social work from Florida A&M University, as well as master's degrees in social work and public administration from Florida State University. So let's get into this wonderful discussion that we're going to have today. So we're going to kick off with something that I've borrowed from our team here at GAP, which we have our mission moments that we like to do on our monthly town halls, where we just share a personal story about like what inspires you to do this work that we're doing, and what excites you right now in the field. So I just like to open it up to our panelists to share your mission moment. And I'm going to pick on you, Justin. Let's start with you first.
What? How'd I know that was coming? So, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Justin Ford, as she mentioned, and we get to work together for GAP as a community connector. And I like to consider my job as really the heartbeat in the clinical research world. But personally, my grandmother is my best friend. And so growing up with her, she would have me in the kitchen. We would be cooking food together. And as she got older, oftentimes in African American households, grandma's just getting forgetful, or grandma doesn't know what she's saying, or different things like that. And I think to see someone so close to you really become a shell of who they were can be very hard. And so that's why this work is so important to me, because it hits me personally. It impacts my grandmother, it impacts our family members, our uncles, our aunts that look like us and that don't look like us. And so that's something that I always keep in the back of my mind when I'm really talking to patients, dealing with the community, and doing what we do. Sweet.
That's awesome. And then now I'll pivot to you, Ellen, because I know you actually shared in your bio your personal connection. And I read up on you. You have an Alzheimer's Association feature article too about your story. So share with us, please.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, I have to echo, I guess, Justin's story a little bit. My grandmother went through a about 15-year journey with Alzheimer's, and she was the matriarch of our family. My father's generation is 9, and so she had a large support group to help her through her journey. However, it took a toll. Like I saw family members pass away after their caregiving role had ended. And so I keep that in mind. Like I usually have a picture, I just moved into this office, but I keep a picture of my grandmother right near my desk because she is my passion. She is my motivation. And finding a cure for this disease of the community, of families, is very important and near and dear to my heart.
I love that. Reuben?
Yeah. Hey, hello, everybody. My name is Reuben Gatonga. And my inspiration into this world of clinical trials and medicine in general is inspired by many things. But one of the things that really inspires me in this, or really drove me into this world, is because I grew up in Africa and I grew up in the 90s. In the 90s, that is where we would have a new virus invade Africa. This was HIV and AIDS. And I remember the fear that the whole country, well, let me talk about my village, which was about 2,000 people. The whole fear that this whole village was engulfed in due to this virus. And at that point, as a young boy, I started thinking, maybe I should join the medical world to study and see how to combat these things. And then fast forward to 2019, my grandmother would be diagnosed with dementia. And I saw that struggle. And that's when I got my master's after I came to the United States, I got my master's in biotechnology. And here I am doing what I like.
That's awesome. And Nikole?
Hi, my name is Nikole, and I've always knew from like around high schools, I've always wanted to help people, and specifically, I've always wanted to work with the elderly population because I feel that with their walks of life, there's a lot of struggles that they do endure as time goes on from their bodies and especially their minds, especially with dementia, Alzheimer's. It's a really hard thing to see them have such bright personalities before and then slowly kind of fade away because of this Alzheimer's disease. And I thought the only way to be able to help them directly was through therapy or do being in the hospital. But then I come to learn about clinical trials, and I was very impressed with what it represents. Basically, we're trying to find different treatments or ways to help either slow down the progression or to hopefully stop it in its entirety. And from what I've heard is just that research and advancement in Alzheimer's specifically has been tremendous leaps since 10 20 years ago. Even we had a lot of advancements, and I'm really looking forward to being a part of those advancements as well.
That's awesome. I always like to think of our connection to Alzheimer's disease as, they say there's 6 degrees of separation between many things. And it's very amazing to me when I meet folks out in the community or even in this profession, how so many of us have a personal connection to the work. And that just makes it better, I think, for us to execute. So let's get right into it. I don't know if we've been joined by Dr. Verghese yet. I know that you guys are so busy on the site level, and we have many folks from the sites here today. So thank you again so much. And lots of sponsors are on as well as many of our colleagues from GAP. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days this afternoon to join us. But let's just jump right into it. Let's talk about the intake and screening process. So this question may be geared toward more so you, Nikole and Reuben as coordinators, and then Justin, having been a coordinator yourself. Talk to us about that intake process and what it's like collecting information from patients.
Well, at our site, we do memory evaluations, and so we make sure to bring the patient, we do phone screens first, making sure we get all the necessary information, such as like their year of birth or their like medication, like health related things, as well as finding out about their we do have a demographics. We do have to make sure we collect their ethnicities as well, to make sure that we can input that into data when it comes to EDC or sponsor specific studies. But we make sure to, once we get the phone screen, we bring them in for the memory evaluation. There we can have a better conversation, like our PI is able to have a more of an in-depth discussion with them on how their memory is going, and we kind of get to know them a little more on a personal level, just that we can be able to kind of see like what studies that we do have that be able to be best fit for the specific patient.
And I'll add something to that, Nikole. I think that's amazing what you guys are doing. I've had the opportunity to work with Syrentis very closely, but I think it's important to remember that we're collecting information and we're collecting data. And when it comes to underrepresented populations, it's already an uncomfortable situation. It's a very vulnerable situation. It's a sensitive situation. And so I remember as a coordinator, working in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cardiology, ophthalmology, it's all, you have to enter it the same with sensitivity. And when you get to know people, for people, and humanize the process, which I think sometimes we can forget, we can get caught up in, recruitment and numbers, which is important, but these are humans that we're dealing with. And so when collecting this data, getting to know that person, making them feel comfortable, in turn, you'll get better data out of the that interview or that consenting process when you really humanize it and get to know people. So I think that's an element that we don't want to forget.
Oh yeah, no, most definitely. And I do notice that like there's the intakes itself is a difficult process, especially if there's like the subject is going through memory loss or memory concerns. So it's walking the fine line of making sure you be empathetic to them as well as the process of data collecting. I do notice that there are some, like I have noticed in the past when taking certain like ethnicities, like more so for Asian communities. I feel like there's some Asian communities who have more difficulty expressing their health or maybe their mental health especially. And so we make sure to be able to kind of have a listening ear and be a little bit more understanding about the background they come from, or like their reasons why they're not able to speak so freely about these kind of things.
Also, I might add that, this whole process starts way further back, like going back into the communities and speaking to people. And like Justin has mentioned, you are going to talk to these people and make them comfortable. And you must make sure that you do not make them feel like, oh, I just want you to join this clinical trial because I need you to join the clinical trial.
Yes.
But you must really let them know that this is for, the benefits of this clinical trial. Why am I even trying to recruit you into a clinical trial? As Justin is talking about, humanizing the process and not making this person feel like just data. You must make that person feel that there is a person, and what we are doing is a whole process that is beneficial, not only to you, not only to us, but to humanity as a whole.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that because, when we're basically with the data on the like a sponsor end or like further in like that, it's just maybe the like subject numbers or just like numbers or like information. But at a site level, it is important to be able to kind of recognize or at least acknowledge like the people that are taking the time to come into the clinical trial and then also taking the time to even doing all these visits in the first place.
I know at our site, a lot of times during the screening process, we separate the caregiver and support person from the patient to give them equal space and time to really talk about how they feel about this disease process and how they're experiencing it on an individual level as also a family level, because a lot of times together you'll get one story, but when you really give them time to self-identify and really tell their perspective of this process and this story, you get a more complete look at this family and really, can describe what you're trying to offer them as a whole. So we found that really beneficial.
So that's very excellent, Ellen. That's a very excellent point because, yeah, a majority of times with the screening process, especially with Alzheimer's dementia studies, they do require a study partner. And sometimes, although the participant themselves may not be like, oh, my memory is like, okay, maybe it's not like they don't think they're far down, but then this caregiver are usually the ones that are able to see them on the outside perspective and able to kind of see like, more details than what we do. So there has been times where we have to separate the caregiver and the subject to be able to kind of get more of a fuller picture about things. And that's why there's during these Alzheimer's trials, they have like memories, not only memory assessments, like cognitive assessments to make sure we measure like how the subject is doing, but there's also clinical assessments where we ask the caregiver about, how the subject's doing at home. And because although we can do so many tests here and like measure their memory, applying it in real life is definitely a different ballgame.
I love, Justin, that you said humanize it, right? Humanize this, because we say data, right? Data collection, and that's the whole theme of our series here. But I like that you also said, Reuben, that we have to take a step back. Like, what do we have to do to get us here, right? Data is the end goal, but there's work that needs to be done to get there. And so that's a nice segue to the next question that I have about like actually completing an intake. Like, is a patient just given, a paper form to fill out? Does a coordinator sit there and review it with them? And sort of like talk us through like some of the do's and don'ts of filling out that intake.
Yeah, of course. So when it comes to filling out the intake, sometimes we do like give them the demographics or paperwork to fill out like the basic information, everything, and like anything like they have like past medical history or past medications. So those are very important like things to confirm with. And what is also important to know is that when it comes to the intakes is that although, especially when it comes to this population, those that have memory trouble, like when they're filling out the information, sometimes they might forget that about certain like types of medications they're taking. So we have to kind of walk through with them saying like, okay, if they're able to either remember or hopefully the study partner's there with them to be able to kind of confirm if these medications are correct. We can always get more data coming in with if they sign a medical release form, medical records. It's very important to be very thorough with that. Like we can get their word of mouth, but we also need to back it up with medical records as well. So that's why we do have them sign a medical release form to be able to get more in-depth information about their health, as well as the medications they are taking. So although we are very thorough with them writing, we also review with them, we sit down with them, kind of going one by one, saying, oh, we noticed that you said, you start having your hard of hearing. Do you know when that started? Because start dates are very important when it comes to research. We have to know when certain health events did occur and when certain medication has start dates occur as well, because it has to be based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria of a study, where some medications have to be taken for at least 3 months prior to screening, or there's like, for example, someone had like basal, like certain type of cancers, like they have to at least be cancer-free for at least 5 years before going on to a study. So all these little details are something that have to be more in depth with not only by their report, but also as a coordinator, being able to walk through it with them as well.
Wow, so that's a very thorough process. So specifically, sorry, when we're looking at the demographic questions, right? Like that, those race and ethnicity check boxes, if you will. We know that there are instances where a patient, for example, may select other, or they may leave it blank. So Justin, I would like to hear your perspective on this, like having that DEI background as well. And then also taking to consideration like some of the policies, I guess, if you will, around the intake process. What do you do in those instances where, you know, a patient doesn't want to select it, or they select other, or you know, what does that look like?
I think I've had a lot of cases where the box has not been checked at all. And so I think we're tempted to, you know, what we all do is kind of look at that person and assume possibly what their race is or what their ethnicity is, which is something you really just cannot do. I know in the past people have just checked, oh, well, they must be African American or they must be this. But, you know, in the discussion of race and ethnicity, it's much broader than a checkbox, first of all. And I think that's a big thing. We have to put boxes that are there and available. But in situations where we have had where patients do not check that box, you know, it's one of those things you have to make sure that you do not self-report on their behalf, but it could be a follow-up phone call that kind of has to happen, but that box needs to be checked by them and self-reported by them. That's not for us to make that call.
And I think some education around why we are gathering this information really helps them to want to offer their response. So, you know, why is it important that we know, you know, what race you are or what ethnic group you are? And this is our effort to make it ethical and balanced and diverse, right, in the study. And I think the more we educate the patient who left the box blank on the why, the more likely they are to respond. And like he said, we can't assume. I mean, I've made that mistake myself where, you know, heading into the room, I've already made my assumption. I look down at the paper and I'm like, oh, okay, well, my guess was wrong. And, you know, and even sometimes I open a little discussion around, you know, whatever their answer is to learn more about their background and let that be my segue into knowing a little bit more about that patient. But the why is very critical to most patients. And once you give them the reason, they're more likely to respond.
That is so important, Ellen. That is a nice segue again to a question that we have around staff training. So is that something that just, you know, comes naturally to certain coordinators or staff that are engaging with patients to sort of educate them and inform them? Of course, the informed consent process, and even when we're doing outreach, right? Talking about the importance of brain health and opportunities to engage in clinical research. Is this actually like a part of staff training and resources, or does it just happen naturally? And does it need to be a part of staff training? And I'll go to you, Ellen.
I think training is always welcome, right? I mean, the more we know and are reminded about why we're doing what we're doing, it's always going to be helpful. Of course, there's always going to be people who are more comfortable about talking about different topics with patients. Sometimes the patients make it more comfortable, and sometimes it's just the person who's able to open up these discussions a lot more easierly. But I do think here, like we try to do the training at least once a year. A lot of the sponsors include this training as a part of their onboarding process when you start up a new trial. So we are getting more and more training from different directions. But I think at our site, we have a pretty diverse staff. So that allows us to kind of talk about these issues and topics fairly often here at the site. And so, I think it's an ongoing conversation. It can't just be once or twice. It has to be continual from different areas and different perspectives.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to talk about how it's important. Training, there's one piece we can't train, which is who we are sometimes and our experiences and where we come from. And so it's very important that sites are representative of the communities that they live in. And I know that can definitely be a challenge. But that is definitely something that's very important when it comes to really building that trust in these communities.
That's a great point, Justin. And Nikole, I think you were going to say something earlier as well.
No, I feel very much Ellen and just have to put everything into words for me, but I do also find that like site training is important. Sometimes people might have the innate ability to be able to have a conversation like that, but I do believe that like in staff, like with staff, it's very important to be able to have that discussion as well as training for it. During my first time becoming a coordinator, I had to shadow like senior coordinators and watch them how they like be able to kind of navigate and coordinate that kind of discussion, that like there have been check boxes that have not been filled out, or when they put other, we have to like kind of elaborate with them, because sometimes they're like, oh, like they could be mixed races, that's why they want to specify, like they don't know what boxes to check, because you have to kind of, they have to keep in mind like, oh, I might be like, you know, half Caucasian or half Asian or things like that.
Very good point.
Now there's a question. There's a question in the the chat box. It says, "What if your conversation with the person makes it obvious they should have checked another box?" And then the person asks, "Can we check more than one box?"
Those are good questions for like the sponsor sort of like FDA component of this series, I think, which, well, that's a nice segue to or nice promotion for our third part of this series. But that question also came up. We had a roundtable at our GAP conference in February, and we had some folks from the sites join, and they were asking those questions too, like who determines these check boxes, right? And is there any customization available for our sites? So I don't know if anyone has any insight on that.
Well, in my experience, working in some studies, there have been options, because we have to create a source document to go along with the EDC, like electronic program that the sponsors use to be able to collect this data. And there are options where there is an other box, and that's where we could clarify on like I said, mixed races and things like that. There could be some clarifications, but there has been a little bit more generalization when it comes to the demographics options for that. And some people can be very specific, but I don't know if the sponsors want the specificity, or they just want a more like outline data collection basically for that.
So I believe the sponsors are guided kind of by the FDA. And so the demographics that the FDA is trying to capture, which is very narrow, you know, it's about 5 boxes. So I just kind of like to reiterate to the patient, this is the type of data that we're capturing for the sponsor. I do not have the ability to capture the other types of data. I mean, here in our area in Tampa, we have about 14% mixed race that report as multiple races. So I'm not unable to capture that in most studies. But we are trying to, at the site level, capture these things so that as the sponsors catch up to the reality of what we see in the real world, we're able to report that kind of information, right? But again, I think it's just going back to re-educating the patient, why we're capturing it the way we are, and that we really don't have the ability at this time to adjust that field. So, you know, with the given information, are you able to identify with any of these boxes, right?
Wow. Yeah, I love that you said, Ellen, you kind of spoke to your site level analytics and even reporting up to sponsors. Like if they're seeing, for example, like the demographics in certain areas aren't shaking out how they anticipate them to, like these are the reasons why, because perhaps there aren't check boxes available to capture this particular population. Or, you know, there needs to be some level of customization per like geography, right? So these are all good points for us to discuss. So I'll ask Paula, I see your question. Thank you for giving us some questions for the Q&A. We'll circle back to that during our Q&A session. So as we're talking about site level analytics and reporting up to sponsors, Ellen, can you talk to us more about what does that look like for your site? How do you make sure that you're capturing the right, data, the metrics that you need at your site to be able to, determine if you're hitting the marks that you're supposed to, or, hitting the objectives that are set by the sponsors for some of your studies?
I think at the site level, you first have to know the city, right? So what are the demographics in your city and your area? And then I kind of like to zoom down a little bit more. So here's our site in a 10-mile radius. What are the demographics in that 10-mile radius? And then stretch it out a little bit more. What are my demographics in a 20-mile radius? So really, the goal is that your enrollment would reflect the same demographics that you have in your community, right? We can't make up people. So if our community is 80% Caucasian and 20% other mixed races, like, you're not going to do better than that 80-20, right? I can only give you what's in my community. But if you don't know what's in your community, you don't know where to set your goals at as a site. And so, I mean, there's really good census data out there, but there's also, other ways to figure out, okay, if these different demographics are located in different areas, I can go to those areas and, help recruit from those different populations. But when you're doing that, you also want to target your materials, for those different populations. What's the education level in that community? Should I be having a lot more detail about the studies, or should I be making it a little bit more simpler, lowering the barriers? So I think when you're really looking at your site as a whole, the first goal is to know what can you do as far as diversity, and then set your own personal site level goals for that.
That's so great. I've never heard it put like that, but that's great because there's no one trick that works everywhere. I think you have to know your site, know your community, and kind of customize, as Ellen said, customize it to what works best for you. So, but a big part of that is learning your community, knowing your community, and having reasonable expectations for the community that you're located in.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true, because I love it, because there was a time Justin and I was speaking about one study, and we are looking at the demographics, and we are like, we're not hitting as much as, so many Black, African-American people. And I remember going to the website and looking up, what is the demographics of Santa Ana, California? And I found out that we do not have those people here. And so I told Justin, I said, hey, we need to go to LA, because we do not have those people here. We cannot find them. So we need to go where they are. But now that brings another constraint of, hey, LA, which is Los Angeles, California, is about 40 miles away from me. So that brings another constraint of transportation and things like that. So, like, I agree with what Ellen said. You have got to know where you are and what you can offer, and that's the only thing that you can offer. But then you can also be more creative and look at, what else is needed and what can you try to, help with.
Yeah. I just wanted to add on this really quickly, that a really good way to be able to have more community outreach is to be able to kind of see like what kind of help, whether it's health events or even like events that might not even be related to health. Like, I've been to a Juneteenth event and a Black Pride Parade event. And that's where we're able to also like kind of bit more of an outreach for like those like demographics and everything. So even going to like those events kind of would also be a really good way to be able to reach like different populations. So if it's like limited in your areas.
Can I just say, this is all music to my ears. Like, it just reiterates that we're all aligned in this work, and that, like, from our perspective as GAP community connectors and our inclusive research initiative, like, we help sites do a lot of this research, looking at the demographics of their communities and identifying, stakeholders in those communities that they can connect with from a diversity perspective. And then also helping them with that strategy, like you said, Nikole, like and like you said, Reuben, as well, like, where are those folks? They're in community. attending a lot of these cultural events, for example. So this is like all, reaffirming, isn't it, Justin?
Yeah, it is. And with that being said, I like that you said we're all in this together. So make sure you use that question and answer box, because we would love to hear kind of what is working for other sites, because I really do feel like we are all in this together and we're learning from each other, and we have to come together if we want to make a difference. So we want to see some questions in that Q&A box, or strategies, or what works for your sites at that time.
Yes, yes. So right before we get to the Q&A, just sort of like a wrap up for our segment here, I would love to hear, as we're talking about some of our initiatives at our sites, like, would you all like to share some of either innovative things that you're doing to reach diverse communities, or programs or strategies that you have to help promote inclusion and health equity? And I'll start with you, Ellen.
So, I mean, currently we're really trying to engage more with the community and really build up our rapport with some of the communities we have failed to build relationships with over time, right? So we're going into more of the churches, we're going more into the health fairs, lots of health fairs that are already happening, already established networks and resources in our community that people already trust, right? So we're partnering with them to kind of give our site credibility as far as being a healthcare resource, and really just trying to spend more dedicated resources to meeting those goals of diversity.
That's awesome. Reuben?
Yeah, I think it's still the same for us, the Syrentis. But one thing that we did was last year, after talking about this discussion for a long time, Syrentis decided to open a whole office which is dedicated to diversity and community outreach, which is the office that I sit in. So one of the things that we do on top of that is now to be intentional with our efforts. We cannot just sit in the office and talk about it. We have got to go out and identify events. We've got to identify people. We've got to identify, neighborhoods. We've got to identify everything that we need. So as she said, we also do churches. We can go to maybe predominantly Black churches, or predominantly, Asian churches. We can also do cultural events, like Nikole mentioned, the Juneteenth event, Black History Parade. So we have got to be intentional in identifying those places where we can find these people.
Intentional is such a key word, right? And it's important that you mentioned that many sites have, dedicated specifically DEI staff to this effort, because it's a lot of work. I like to say it's a labor of love, but it can be very taxing. So there needs to be some intentional focus to those efforts. Like, if we have goals of recruiting folks into the study, we have to be consistent, we have to be intentional, and we have to be in community, reaching them where they are. And that requires resources to do that. So
Yes, definitely.
that's so great.
And speaking of those resources, interesting, because I've worked at sites that have had their own departments for diversity and outreach coordinators and different things. And I've also worked at sites that don't. So then what do you do at those sites that just don't have the bandwidth to do that and to really be in the community as much as they need to be? And some sites have gotten really creative. I've worked with one site where I don't know where my voice is going, but it's leaving. But I have worked with sites where they would kind of flex their coordinators' time so that they could be in the office with patients, but then they also were able to go out in the community like once a month, just to kind of raise awareness, to get their name out there, to begin that trust within the community. So, it really does require us thinking out of the box and really getting a little uncomfortable to get comfortable with these patients and with these people, to really make that impact there too. So sometimes we got to kind of get creative.
Yeah, no, definitely with the creativity on that. And then when we do have those outreaches, like, it's really important to be able to kind of educate what clinical research is, or research is in general, because I feel like a lot of these populations, or even anyone in general, don't really realize what research is really about and what clinical trials really about. So I think it'd be really beneficial to be able to educate those populations, be able to kind of know, like, what our goals are and be able to see how it can align with their, what they would like to do as well.
That's great. I love, Justin, that you mentioned, you kind of alluded to capacity at sites and how everyone may not be able to have a dedicated office to DEI or those efforts, or, sometimes, like you said, coordinators may be flexing, and you have like recruitment teams that are also doing outreach in instances. So that is a very good reminder that we can, be creative and start to think outside the box. And then also leverage, GAP. We have amazing, liaisons who help with this work, as well as community connectors. So we are here to serve. Utilize us.
No, honestly, I back that up on that one. Like, we have worked with GAP for quite some time, and I can't thank them enough for their outreach and their help with being able to like kind of extend to the community as well. They've been such a great support with us. I think they are very much a platform that you guys should utilize in order to be able to like, have more diversity and more community outreach in general.
Yay.
We didn't pay them to say that, by the way.
We did not.
Just based on experience.
No, but one also last thing I wanted to add when it comes to the site, and if you don't have bandwidth, we have worked with sites too that have a recruitment team, and they also have a clinical team, and they're separate. So I think it's important for everyone at the site to kind of be on the same page, to be on one accord, and really help each other and communicate with each other in the site. To have that interdepartmental communication is important too, because sometimes you can leverage each other or other teams that you have within your department.
That's a great tip. So now we are going to open it up for our Q&A session. So feel free to come off of mute if you want to ask a question to any of our panelists, or go into the chat and put your question there if you feel more comfortable. And Paula, I'm going to circle right back to you because you asked some really great questions that we were able to address a little bit early on. But I think there was one more that you put in here about sites capturing information where a patient identifies with more than one race. And I think, Ellen, you answered that, like, we aren't always able to capture if there's multiple checkboxes. I think it has to do with the EDC, or can you refresh our memories on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the sponsor is the one who really kind of defines what we're able to capture for the study. But I was more so referring to like building out your own site level data system to capture a more wider variety of demographics. Because I think at one point the FDA and the sponsors will catch up and start capturing more of this data, and you'll already be prepared with it, right? So it's about more of a site level way to capture the data.
And I know at sites that we've used our CTMS system to kind of do that at like a pre-screening level, just kind of collect as much demographic information as you can, notes, comments. And then we've also created like our own, like, little pre-screeners that have those questions too. Because a lot of times you have to collect that information once they consent, but can you get it prior, if you can?
Yeah. And I think reporting up, right? So like if you're reporting to the sponsor during like the SIVs, that our site level demographics or our access is this, and it has a wide variety of information, and it's not just those little boxes. I think that helps to open their mind to like, oh, okay, like we really should be capturing more of a wider net when it comes to demographics, races, and ethnicity. So it's all about trying to motivate them and report up.
Yeah, that is so important. That's a great reminder too, that, sometimes we have pre-screeners in our studies, but sometimes sites have, like, from a GAP perspective and a sponsor perspective, they have pre-screens, but then also the sites themselves have pre-screens. And I know some of our sites have amazing, like, comprehensive pre-screening processes, and they capture those metrics, which I think are great to help inform, who are we reaching? Because what we find is, right, when we're going through that process of, randomizing folks and folks dropping off, at certain points in the process, how can we still capture the story of like who we were able to engage, right? I think that's so important. So that's a good reminder about the pre-screening process as well.
That's a beautiful thing you just said, Janay, is that everyone has a story. And I've never thought of it this way, but every patient kind of has a story. And if you follow along of their research journey going through from consent to clinical visits to following up with the PI is how we are connecting and weaving together this story and humanizing this story and trying to get the best data out of this story. That's a cool way of looking at it. I've never, side point for me, but I've never thought.
Yeah, which is important, right? When we're reporting up to our sponsors, right? And then for them, yeah, we're giving a preview of our FDA discussion, which I see someone put a interesting comment in there about the FDA. When they're going through their process, right, of creating diversity plans, these are important points I think that they, would be helpful for them to include. Speaking of which, I do see someone put into the chat, the draft FDA guidance from January 2024 states, consistent with best practices, FDA recommends that trial participants self-report race and ethnicity information and that those individuals be permitted to designate a multiracial identity. Interesting. So that brings up a good point of like, have our sponsors really caught up to that guidance? So that'll be something interesting that we can dive into. Because again, it goes back to like that EDC, right? Like what are we able to actually put in there? And then can it be changed? So
yeah, I think the last census data drills down to 6. So do you identify with 6 different races? So I think we got a long way to catch up.
And speaking of catching up, I think the world is evolving and changing so quickly. And even with simple things such as 23andMe and people just learning about their ancestry and learning where they come from and learning who they are, it really gets, it breaks down. So I think it's one of those things that we really do have to address sooner than later, just because of the fact that people are really learning who they are, and we have to be able to capture that data.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting when we're talking about the aging population, right? So I think right now we're looking at a generation who may, like I think almost 0% in Tampa answered that they've identified with more than 3 races. So I think as we get more generations getting older, I think that's going to increase, right? So I think who we see now for 65 and up probably don't consider themselves that diverse or biracial, but I think that will definitely grow as, those populations start to age out.
Yeah. And I think that since we are in the U and like we're primarily in the US, it's like a big, basically melting pot of like different types of cultures, diversities, and everything. So it will hopefully eventually the FDA is able to account for that as well. And I did notice that like for example, like with the Asian communities, like there's like some people identify as like, let's see how to phrase this. Where some like Koreans or Chinese, and maybe they or half Korean, half Chinese. Like, how do you just they want to identify as both things or just one? So I think that right now we only do Asian American, but hopefully in the future there might be more like resources to kind of delve into more of the of that.
You raise a good point, Nikole. Shout out to our colleagues at Toronto Memory Program, which I support. Toronto, I was pleasantly surprised to learn, has such a huge Asian population, which is like the majority of the ethnic group there. And I think they may be the majority in the city overall. And so again, that opens up like even more of those options. Like you're saying, Asia is so huge. So you have South Asians, you have East Asians, and even subgroups under there. So there are definitely unique perspectives that we need to account for in this process as well. And then also, we have GapNet sites that are also in Europe. So again, like if we have studies where we're still showing, for example, Black/African American, it's not applicable, but it's like listed as one of those options. So it can become very problematic, I think. Yeah, so there's always room for improvement. And so I see that we have an interesting question here about sponsors being held accountable from the FDA as far as, delivering on the diversity expectations. So we have, guidance from the FDA, but it's just that it's guidance. So there isn't like a requirement, right? And the sponsors have to put together diversity plans, but are they really held, accountable to delivering on those? So these are all like great questions to set us up for our next part of our series. And so let me see here, just in the chat, if I can answer one more before we wrap up here. I'm so pleased that this has been such a great conversation with you all. So I see maybe there's some revised guidance that's coming for next year. And there's some curiosity about alignment with the U.S. Census Bureau. Paula, I know we had such a great, Paula is another one of our community connectors at GAP, and we had such an interesting conversation just earlier today about, the census rolling out more categories for race and ethnicity. And so how will that, inform moving forward those options that we may or may not have available? So we know that the government is so vast, like all the parts just need to work together for our benefit, right? One day. So again, thank you all so very much for your time today. I know you're all so busy, but thank you so much for spending this hour with us and dedicating for our dynamic panel, sharing your perspectives and your experience, and having such a rich discussion for us. It's been so great. As a reminder, our next webinar is scheduled for May 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And as I've been dropping little nuggets this whole time, it'll be focused on the FDA's guidance to sponsors to have diversity plans. And so there will be more to come on that. We'll be make sure that we share a save the date and then calendar appointments as well for you all. So any closing remarks from our panelists?
And also, these are great forums for meeting other people and bouncing ideas off. So definitely feel free to engage with someone that you might not know in the comments and connect and share ideas and different things like that. I definitely encourage that. And thank you to Syrentis. This is the site that I support for being an amazing site. That's all I want to say. You guys are great.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you.
And Ellen, is there a closing remark or?
Oh, I'm always open to a discussion about how to do things better and more efficiently. And so if anybody wants to reach out on how to collaborate and reach these diverse groups, and I'm always open to discussion. So feel free to email me or call me at any time.
No, that's amazing.
I hope that this discussion is able to give everyone a good insight on how they could increase diversity and as well as maybe do more community outreaches, because I feel like that is one of the best ways to be able to gather more of this population. So I really hope that everyone's able to get some good information from this panel.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you all so much for spending your morning or afternoon with us, wherever you are. And you will hear from us again soon. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.